Hello. I've always believed that marriages, at their core, are built on patterns. You wake up, you kiss, you eat breakfast together, and then you go about your day, trusting that the foundation you've built will hold everything steady. Amanda and I had been married for 25 years, long enough for our patterns to become second nature. But lately, something about those patterns had changed. At first, it was subtle. Amanda was always meticulous about her routines. Her mornings used to begin with a quiet moment sipping coffee by the kitchen window, her face glowing in the morning light as she scrolled through her emails. But now, her attention seemed to linger on her phone longer than usual, her thumb swiping across the screen with a frequency that felt suspicious. It wasn't just her phone. The late nights at work had become alarmingly frequent, a steady drumbeat that didn't match the usual rhythm of her career. Amanda had always been busy, marketing directors at major firms tend to be, but this was different. She'd come home later, barely offer an explanation, and move through the house like a ghost, her mind clearly somewhere else. "Big project?" I'd ask when she slipped off her heels and dropped her purse on the counter. "Yeah, something new," she'd reply without meeting my eyes. Then she'd disappear upstairs. After years of knowing someone, you can feel their distance without needing to name it. I started to pay attention. One Tuesday night, we sat across from each other at the dinner table. The quiet hum of suburban Denver filtered through the windows. A distant lawnmower, a dog barking a few houses down, and a low rumble of a passing car. Amanda pushed her salad around her plate without much interest, her phone resting just to the side of her fork. "I have a dinner tomorrow," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her tone was casual, as if she were mentioning a stop at the grocery store. "Oh." I kept my voice steady, not wanting to betray the flicker of suspicion sparking in my chest. "Another late night at work?" Her eyes darted to mine, then away just as quickly. "Team dinner. It's for bonding. You know how these corporate things are." She speared a piece of lettuce and smiled faintly. "Sean's organizing it. He's been a big help on this project." Sean. The name landed heavy in my mind. I wasn't familiar with any Sean. Over the years, Amanda's work stories had always included a revolving cast of coworkers, but I had no memory of a Sean. And the way she said his name, lightly, like a secret she didn't quite want to share, it made my stomach tighten. "Sean?" I prompted, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah, Sean Harrison. He's in sales. He joined the team a few months ago." Amanda's smile broadened, as if she'd realized she'd said too much and was overcompensating. "Great guy. Very charismatic." Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up briefly. She glanced at it quickly, but didn't pick it up. The name didn't appear. It was just a notification banner. But her shoulders seemed to stiffen for a fraction of a second before she resumed eating. I didn't press her. Not then. But my mind was already unraveling the thread. That night, after Amanda went to bed, I stayed downstairs under the guise of finishing some work. My laptop was open, but I wasn't working. My eyes kept drifting toward the staircase, and my thoughts were circling the same uneasy conclusion. Something was off. When I finally climbed the stairs, the bedroom light was already off. Amanda was asleep, her breath slow and steady. Her phone rested on her nightstand, the screen dark. I hesitated by her side of the bed, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. I'd never once gone through her phone in all the years we'd been together. It felt like crossing an unspoken boundary, a betrayal of the trust that had sustained our marriage. But the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't let go. Trust isn't blind, I told myself. It's earned, and right now I needed answers. With a quick glance to make sure Amanda hadn't stirred, I picked up her phone. My hands felt clammy as I swiped up to unlock it. The screen illuminated, and there it was, a string of recent texts from Sean H. My heart sank. "Sean, can't wait to see you tomorrow, babe. We'll pick up where we left off. Amanda, looking forward to it, winking-faced." The words burned into my mind, every letter and nail driven into the foundation of our marriage. I scrolled up, my fingers trembling. There were other messages, too, casual flirtations interwoven with mentions of work. It was clear this wasn't a professional relationship. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, staring at the evidence of Amanda's betrayal. 100 emotions surged through me. anger, disbelief, heartbreak. But one thought rose above the chaos. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. If Amanda was willing to throw away 25 years of marriage for some coworker, I needed to know the full extent of it. Not just for my own clarity, but to make sure she couldn't twist the story into something else. If she had made this deliberate choice, I wasn't going to let her play the victim. Quietly, I returned her phone to the nightstand and climbed into bed. Amanda shifted slightly, murmuring something in her sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll start digging deeper. I'll find out everything. And when the time is right, Amanda and Sean will both learn what happens when you think you can lie to me and get away with it. The morning after I found the texts, I woke with a clear resolve. Amanda lay beside me, her hair a mess of auburn curls against the pillow. She looked peaceful, even content, as though the weight of her secret had no bearing on her conscience. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I forced myself to hold back. Emotional outbursts wouldn't help. I needed facts, proof, and above all, control. The plan began to take shape over breakfast. Amanda sat across from me, absently scrolling through her phone while sipping her usual black coffee. "You're quiet this morning," she said, her tone casual. "Just a lot on my mind," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "Big project coming up at work." She nodded but didn't press further. A small part of me wondered if she'd even noticed the shift in my demeanor, but it didn't matter. By the time she left for the office, I had already made my decision. That afternoon, I reached out to someone I'd never thought I'd need, a private investigator. Her name was Lila. I found her through a recommendation from a former client who had once gone through a similarly messy situation. Lila answered on the first ring, her voice calm and professional. "This is Lila. How can I help you?" I hesitated for a moment, the words feeling heavy as I spoke them aloud. "I think my wife is having an affair." There was a pause on the other end of the line, but not an uncomfortable one. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "Why don't you tell me what's been going on?" For the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out. The late nights, the mysterious coworker, and the damning texts. I told her about Amanda's dinner plans that night, and how I needed someone discreet to follow her. Lila listened without interruption, her tone measured and direct when she finally responded. "I can help you," she said. "We'll start tonight. I'll need some basic information, her schedule, the make and model of her car, and any locations you suspect she might frequent with this coworker." I gave her everything she needed. When we hung up, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back. That evening, Amanda was uncharacteristically talkative as she got ready for her so-called team dinner. "Sean's been such a lifesaver on this project," she said while rifling through her closet for something to wear. "I don't know how I would have managed without him." I watched her pull out a sleek black dress, one I hadn't seen her wear in years. It hugged her figure in a way that was undeniably intentional. "You're dressing up?" I said, keeping my tone light. "It's a nice restaurant," she replied, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, feigning indifference. "Have fun tonight." She kissed me on the cheek before heading out, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. As soon as I heard the door close, I picked up my phone and called Lila. "She's on her way," I said. "I've got her," Lila assured me. The waiting was the worst part. I tried to distract myself with work, but my mind kept drifting to Amanda. Where was she now? What was she saying to him? My thoughts spiraled into dark places, each scenario worse than the last. By the time Lila called me back, it was well past midnight. "Eric," she said, her voice steady, "I have what you're looking for." She didn't elaborate over the phone, but promised to meet me the next day to go over the details. I barely slept that night, the weight of anticipation pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The following afternoon, Lila and I met at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, with short blonde hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She slid a manila folder across the table toward me. "I followed her to a restaurant downtown," she began. "She wasn't alone. The man you described, Sean, was with her." I opened the folder, my stomach tightening as I sifted through the photographs. There they were, Amanda and Sean sitting at a candlelit table, their heads close together as they laughed over a shared joke. One image showed his hand resting on hers. Another captured them leaving the restaurant, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that spoke volumes. Lila continued. After dinner, they drove to the Montgomery Hotel. They checked in together. Her words were clinical, detached, but the images she provided were anything but. The final photo in the stack showed Amanda and Sean kissing in the parking lot, their faces lit by the glow of a nearby street lamp. I closed the folder, my jaw tight. Thank you, Lila. What's your rate for continued surveillance? She arched a brow, impressed by my calm. Most people don't take it this well. I'm not most people, I said flatly. Over the next week, Lila's updates became a regular part of my routine. She followed Amanda and Sean to boutique hotels, upscale restaurants, and even a lakeside resort outside the city. That last location stung the most. It was the place where I had proposed to Amanda all those years ago. The photographs from that trip were especially damning. Amanda and Sean walking hand in hand along the shore, their faces glowing with laughter. By the time Lila handed me the final stack of evidence, I had everything I needed. Amanda's betrayal wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, deliberate choice. As I stared at the photos, a cold resolve settled over me. Amanda thought she was playing a game. She had no idea I was already setting the board for the final move. For days, I carried the weight of Lila's findings like an invisible scar. Each photo, each text message, each moment Amanda spent with Sean carved itself into my mind. But amidst the pain, something shifted. The shock had dulled into resolve, and the heartbreak had sharpened into clarity. Amanda believed she held all the cards. She was wrong. It was during a morning meeting at the office that I found my opportunity. Lily Cooper walked in late, her usual flurry of energy announcing her arrival before she even said a word. "Sorry, Eric," she said, sliding into a seat across from me. Her bright green blouse brought out the mischievous sparkle in her eyes. "Traffic was a nightmare. Glad you could join us," I replied, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Lily was one of my firm's most talented project managers, quick-witted, driven, and just the right amount of brash. Over the years, she'd always been attentive. A little too attentive, if I were being honest. I'd chalked it up to her naturally flirtatious nature, but now I saw it differently. Lily wasn't just playful, she was available. As the meeting dragged on, I found my attention drifting toward her. She caught my eye once or twice, her lips curling into a subtle smile that lingered longer than necessary. It wasn't overt, but it was enough. By the time the meeting ended, I knew what I needed to do. That afternoon, I approached Lily's desk. She looked up from her laptop, her face lighting up as I leaned against the edge of her workspace. "Hey," I said casually. "Got a minute? For you?" "Always." She closed her laptop and turned her full attention to me, tucking a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Listen," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I know we've got the Harris project coming up, but I was wondering if you'd like to grab a drink after work, just to brainstorm some ideas." Her eyebrows shot up, her surprise quickly giving way to a grin. "Eric Walker, are you asking me out for a drink?" "Purely professional, of course," I replied, though my tone betrayed just enough ambiguity to keep her guessing. "Well, in that case," she said, smirking, "I'd love to." Later that evening, we found ourselves at a quiet bar downtown, the kind of place with dim lighting and an atmosphere that lent itself to hushed conversations. Lily leaned across the table, her chin resting on her hand as she listened to me recount an old story about one of our firm's more eccentric clients. "You're kidding," she said, laughing. "I wish I was," I replied, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "He actually demanded we design a rooftop garden with a moat. For fish. Please tell me you talked him out of it." "Not a chance. He loved the idea. Called it his urban oasis." Lily shook her head, her laughter fading into a warm smile. "You've got some stories, Eric. I don't know how you keep your cool with half the stuff you deal with." "It's all about perspective," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You learn to pick your battles." There was a brief pause, a quiet moment where neither of us spoke. Her eyes searched mine, as if trying to decipher the thoughts I wasn't voicing. "You've seemed different lately," she said, her tone softening. "More intense, maybe. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, debating how much to reveal. Let's just say I've been reevaluating a lot of things. Her gaze lingered, and for a moment, I thought she might press further. But instead, she simply nodded. Well, she said, raising her glass. Here's to reevaluations. To reevaluations, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. Over the next few days, I kept my interactions with Lily deliberately light, but charged with just enough subtext to keep her engaged. A compliment here, a lingering glance there. It was a delicate dance, one I navigated with care. At home, Amanda seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. If anything, she seemed almost cheerful, her mood lifted by whatever fantasy she and Sean were weaving. You've been in a good mood lately, she remarked one evening as we sat in the living room. Have I? I replied, not looking up from the book I was pretending to read. Yeah, it's nice. She smiled, but it felt hollow, like a performer delivering a line they didn't quite believe. I forced a smile in return, the irony of her observation almost too much to bear. The real turning point came a few days later. I was in the bedroom, tidying up before heading out to the office, when I noticed Amanda's purse lying open on the dresser. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but a small white card poking out of an inner pocket caught my attention. I hesitated, then reached for it, my pulse quickening as I read the words printed neatly across the front. Rebecca Klein, family law attorney. The card slipped from my fingers, landing softly on the carpet. For a moment, I just stared at it, the implications crashing down around me. Amanda wasn't just having an affair. She was preparing to leave me. And judging by the name of the attorney, she wasn't planning to go quietly. Family law meant one thing. She was ready to fight for a settlement. A bitter laugh escaped my lips as I picked up the card and slid it back into her purse. Amanda thought she was playing me, thought I'd crumble under the weight of her betrayal and hand her everything she wanted. But she underestimated me. As I left the house that morning, my resolve hardened into something unshakable. If Amanda wanted a fight, I'd give her one. But it wouldn't be the kind of fight she was expecting. The game was changing, and I was going to make sure the rules worked in my favor. The card from the divorce attorney never left my thoughts. Amanda had already mapped out her exit strategy, and judging by her calm, almost buoyant demeanor at home, she believed she held every advantage. But I wasn't about to let her narrative go unchallenged. If she wanted to burn down the life we'd built together, then I'd make damn sure she felt the heat. The plan came together faster than I expected. Lila had been discreetly following Amanda for weeks now, and her regular rendezvous with Sean had become almost predictable. They had a pattern like clockwork. Dinner at high-end restaurants, drinks, a quiet drive to a hotel where they'd disappear for hours. That week, Lila tipped me off about their upcoming dinner plans. La Serrata, an upscale Italian place downtown. It was the kind of restaurant Amanda had always loved. Soft lighting, wine glasses that sparkled like diamonds under the chandeliers, and a menu filled with delicate pasta dishes I could never pronounce. I booked a table near the back, arriving early enough to blend into the shadows, but late enough that the restaurant was already buzzing with activity. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, waiting for them to arrive. They walked in a little after 7. Amanda wore a sleek navy dress that clung to her figure, paired with a necklace I'd bought her for our 20th anniversary. Sean was dressed casually, exuding the smug confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. The hostess led them to a table near the center of the room, far enough from mine that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough for my camera's zoom lens to capture every detail. I kept my phone angled discreetly, snapping photos as they settled in. Their conversation began innocently enough. Sean leaned forward, his smile easy, as he poured Amanda a glass of wine. She laughed at something he said, her hand grazing his across the table. But it didn't take long for the mood to shift. As the wine flowed, their voices grew louder, more animated. I couldn't hear every word, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just a casual affair. They were planning something. I adjusted my position, pretending to check my phone while recording a video. The camera caught Sean gesturing expansively, his face alight with excitement. Once the divorce is finalized, he said, his voice carrying just enough for me to catch, we'll finally be able to start living the good life. You'll have your settlement, and we won't have to sneak around anymore." My stomach churned, but I kept my expression neutral. Amanda's response was muffled, but she nodded, a small, complicit smile tugging at her lips. "Eric won't make it easy," she added, her voice low. Sean leaned closer, his expression turning sly. "Let him try. You've got this in the bag. He doesn't even know what's coming." The arrogance in his voice sent a surge of anger through me. But I forced myself to remain calm, focusing on the task at hand. As their conversation continued, I caught the moment Sean made his fatal mistake. "Honestly," he said, swirling his wine like some kind of smug sommelier, "I thought Michelle was going to blow up my life before you, and I even got started. That woman is 10 times crazier than Eric." Amanda's smile faltered, just for a moment. "Michelle?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to cut through the ambient chatter of the restaurant. Sean's smirk wavered, but he recovered quickly. "Relax. That ended weeks ago." "Did it?" Amanda pressed, her eyes narrowing. Sean leaned back, shrugging. "It wasn't serious. She was just there." For a brief moment, Amanda looked genuinely rattled. But just as quickly, she smoothed her expression, taking a long sip of wine before changing the subject. That single exchange told me everything I needed to know. Sean wasn't in this for Amanda any more than she was in it for him. They were using each other, clinging to a fantasy of freedom that would collapse the moment reality set in. By the time they left the restaurant, I had everything I needed: photos, videos, and a front row seat to the cracks in their so-called partnership. I stayed behind, finishing my drink as I reviewed the footage. The image of Amanda and Sean leaning across the table, their faces inches apart, burned itself into my mind. But it wasn't the intimacy that stung. It was the sheer audacity, the way they'd so casually discussed dismantling my life while sipping wine and sharing dessert. As I left the restaurant, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. They thought they were untouchable, that their lies would shield them from the consequences. They couldn't have been more wrong. When I got home, Amanda was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady as I stood in the doorway of our bedroom. I watched her for a long moment, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, betrayal, and something else I couldn't quite name. But there was no time for sentimentality. The game was still unfolding, and I intended to play it to the end. The next morning, I called Lila. "I've got everything I need from the restaurant," I said. "But there's more to this. Sean isn't just Amanda's problem. He's a liability." Lila's tone was professional, but I could hear the intrigue in her voice. "What do you have in mind?" "Let's just say I'm done playing defense," I replied. "It's time to go on the offensive." And with that, the next phase of my plan began to take shape. Amanda and Sean had made their choices, and now I was going to show them the cost. The idea took root the morning after the restaurant. I stood in the kitchen, staring into the rich, swirling depths of my coffee, and made my decision. If Amanda was planning to dismantle our marriage, I was going to take control of how the story ended. By the time she padded downstairs, her hair still tousled from sleep, my mind was already turning over the finer details of the plan. "Morning," she said absently, grabbing her phone from the counter. She scrolled through her notifications, her lips curving into a faint, unreadable smile. "Morning," I replied. I sipped my coffee, watching her over the rim of my mug. "You busy Friday night?" Amanda glanced up, surprised. "Why? I thought we could have dinner. Just the two of us. It's been a while since we had a quiet night together." She hesitated, her eyes darting back to her phone. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then she smiled, a forced, practiced smile that I'd come to recognize all too well. "Sure," she said. "That sounds nice." Friday came quickly, and I spent the day preparing. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic from the roast in the oven, and the table was set with candles and our best dinnerware. Everything was perfectly curated, down to the chilled bottle of Sauvignon Blanc Amanda loved. By the time she arrived home, I was in the kitchen, finishing the last of the preparations. "Wow," she said, stepping into the dining room. She set her bag on a chair and looked around, her eyes lingering on the flickering candles. "You really went all out. Thought it was time we had a proper date night," I said, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated for a moment before sliding into the chair I'd pulled out for her. "This is thoughtful," she said, her tone tinged with mild suspicion. I poured her a glass of wine, sitting across from her as the conversation began to flow. Amanda was unusually quiet, answering my questions with brief, clipped responses. Her phone, perched just within reach on the table, buzzed once or twice, but she ignored it, or at least pretended to. "I've missed this," I said, breaking a moment of silence. Amanda looked up, her expression softening just enough to be convincing. "Yeah, me too." For a brief moment, I almost believed her. But then I caught the subtle flicker of her eyes toward the clock on the wall, and the illusion shattered. Halfway through dinner, Amanda's phone buzzed again, louder this time. She glanced at the screen, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning casual curiosity. "Yeah," she said quickly. I need to run a quick errand. Won't take long." "Now?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's important," she said, already standing. "I'll be back soon." She grabbed her bag and was out the door before I could respond. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone. The GPS tracker I'd planted in her car earlier that week was already sending me real-time updates. The blinking dot on the screen moved steadily across town, heading in a direction that left little doubt about her destination. I called Lila as I slipped on my jacket. "She's on the move," I said. "I'm already in position," Lila replied. By the time I reached the hotel, Amanda's car was parked in the lot. Lila had a clear view from her vantage point, her camera lens trained on the front entrance. "She just walked in with him," Lila said as I joined her. She handed me a tablet, the screen displaying a live feed from the small camera she'd set up earlier. It captured the lobby in crisp detail, showing Amanda and Sean at the check-in counter. I watched as they laughed, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that left no question about their relationship. Sean rested a hand on the small of Amanda's back, guiding her toward the elevator. "Do we have audio?" I asked. "Not in the lobby," Lila replied. "But once they're in the room, the setup should catch everything." I nodded, my jaw tight, as I handed the tablet back to her. Back at the house, the quiet felt almost oppressive as I prepared the final piece of the plan. I connected the live feed from Lila's setup to the smart TV in the living room, adjusting the angle until it filled the screen. The feed flickered briefly before coming into focus, showing Amanda and Sean in a dimly lit hotel room. Sean poured them both drinks, handing one to Amanda as they settled onto the couch. "So," Sean said, his voice dripping with confidence, "how much longer are you going to keep up this charade with Eric?" Amanda sighed, swirling her drink. "Not much longer. The attorney says we're almost ready to file. Just a few more details to iron out." Sean smirked, leaning back with an air of triumph. "And then what?" "You get your settlement, and we sail off into the sunset." Amanda laughed, though it sounded hollow. "Something like that." When Amanda returned home later that night, she found me sitting in the living room, the TV still on. "Hey," she said, her tone light. "Sorry about dinner. Did you save me any?" I didn't respond. I just gestured to the TV. Amanda's smile faltered as she turned toward the screen. Her face went pale as the live feed came into focus. A clear view of her and Sean in the hotel room, their conversation playing out in stark detail. For a long moment, the only sound was the recording of Sean's laughter echoing through the room. "What?" Amanda's voice was barely above a whisper. "What is this?" I stood, crossing the room to stand in front of her. "This," I said, my voice cold and steady, "is the truth. The one you thought I'd never figure out." She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with shock and panic. "Eric, I can explain. Don't bother." I cut her off. "The only thing I want from you now is honesty. But then again, you've never been very good at that, have you?" The color drained from Amanda's face as the weight of the situation sank in. She played her hand, and now I was holding all the cards. When Amanda had gone upstairs the night before, shaken and pale, I stayed in the living room, staring at the darkened screen of the TV. My emotions ran the gamut from rage to bitter satisfaction, but it was the cold determination that anchored me. The pieces were in place now, and it was time to play the next hand. The following morning, I made a series of calls. The first was to Lila, who was already well aware of my plans. "You really want to go through with this?" she asked, her voice calm, but tinged with curiosity. Absolutely, I said without hesitation. All right, she replied. I'll make sure everything's ready. And Eric? This is going to be messy. I'm counting on it. The invitations went out shortly after. I framed the gathering as a small, intimate celebration of our anniversary, something understated yet meaningful. Amanda, still reeling from the previous night, didn't question it. In fact, she seemed almost eager to play along, as if convincing herself that nothing had changed. By the time Saturday evening arrived, the house was spotless, the table set with our best china, and soft music played through the speakers. Friends and family trickled in, offering congratulations and well wishes, and Amanda greeted them all with her usual charm. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. She laughed, chatted, and played the role of the perfect hostess, all while I watched from the periphery, biding my time. As the evening unfolded, I slipped away to the living room, where the stage was already set. The TV was connected to the feed Lila had provided, and the remote rested in my hand. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was it, the moment where everything Amanda had tried to hide would be laid bare. I stepped back into the dining room, where laughter filled the air, and tapped my glass lightly with a fork. Everyone, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, thank you all for being here tonight. Amanda and I are so grateful to have such wonderful friends and family in our lives. The guests quieted, their attention shifting to me. Amanda stood by the table, a glass of wine in hand, her smile radiating a confidence that made my next words all the more satisfying. There's something I'd like to share with you all, I continued, gesturing toward the living room. A little something to mark the occasion. Amanda's smile faltered slightly, her brow furrowing. Eric, what are you? Just a small surprise, I said, cutting her off. You'll love it. Trust me. The guests followed me into the living room, curiosity buzzing among them. Amanda trailed behind, her steps hesitant as she clutched her wine glass tightly. I grabbed the remote, glancing briefly at Amanda before pressing play. The screen flickered to life, revealing the footage Lila had captured in the hotel room. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the scene unfolded. Amanda and Sean, their heads close as they laughed and plotted their future together. The audio was crisp, every word of their conversation cutting through the stunned silence. And once the divorce is finalized, Sean's voice echoed through the room. You'll have everything you need. We'll finally be free. Amanda's face went ashen. Her wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Eric, she whispered, her voice trembling. What the hell is this? Exactly what it looks like, I said coldly. The murmurs among the guests grew louder, a mix of shock, disgust, and disbelief. Amanda's closest friends exchanged horrified glances, some shaking their heads as they took in the betrayal. You've been lying to me, I continued, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. To all of us. And now everyone can see exactly who you are. Amanda's gaze darted around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. The real bombshell came moments later when the front door burst open. A woman stormed in, her face flushed with anger and tears streaming down her cheeks. Where is he? She demanded, her voice cracking. All heads turned toward her, confusion and curiosity written across their faces. Amanda took a step back, her eyes widening in alarm. Who are you? She asked, her voice barely audible. I'm Michelle. The woman spat, her gaze locking onto Amanda, Sean's other girlfriend. A collective gasp swept through the room. Amanda looked like she'd been punched in the gut, her composure crumbling in real time. He's been cheating on you too, Michelle continued, her voice rising. Did you think you were special? You're just another pawn in his game. Sean wasn't there to defend himself. Of course, cowardice had always been his strong suit. But the damage was done. Amanda's betrayal was laid bare for everyone to see, and now the cracks in her carefully constructed narrative had widened into a chasm. The crowd began to disperse shortly after, the weight of the evening too much for anyone to bear. Some offered me sympathetic pats on the shoulder as they left, while others shot Amanda cold, unforgiving looks as they passed. By the time the house was empty, Amanda and I were alone in the living room, the shards of her broken wine glass still scattered across the floor. You humiliated me, she said finally, her voice shaking with fury. No, I replied, my tone as cold as ice. You humiliated yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it. She stared at me, her expression a volatile mix of rage and despair. But I didn't care. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. It was all out in the open now. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. You should leave, I said, turning away from her. There's nothing left for you here. Amanda didn't respond. She just stood there, frozen in place, as the weight of her actions finally caught up to her. The morning after the party was eerily quiet. Amanda was gone when I woke up, her side of the bed stripped bare except for the faint impression where she had lain. Her absence was both a relief and a bitter reminder of everything we had become. By mid-morning, I was sitting in my office, staring at the folder Lila had prepared for me. It contained everything: photos, videos, financial discrepancies, all meticulously organized and ready for the next step. I picked up my phone and made the call I'd been preparing for since the night I first found Sean's texts. David, I said when my lawyer answered. It's time. By early afternoon, I was sitting across from David in his downtown office. His expression was a mix of sympathy and sharp calculation as he flipped through the evidence. This is airtight, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. The prenup alone already puts you in a strong position. But with this, he tapped the stack of photos, his tone tinged with approval. Amanda doesn't stand a chance. I nodded, my jaw tight. I don't want her walking away with anything she doesn't deserve. And she sure as hell doesn't deserve half of what I've built. David smirked, his confidence contagious. She won't. Trust me. This is one of the cleanest cases I've ever seen. Infidelity is hard to dispute when you have photographic proof and recorded conversations. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The wheels were officially in motion, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly in control. The divorce papers were served the next day. Amanda didn't take it well. She showed up at the house that evening, her face flushed with a mix of anger and desperation. Eric, she began the moment I opened the door. What the hell is this? She held up the papers, her hand trembling. What does it look like? I replied, my tone flat. Her eyes narrowed. You're seriously going through with this? After everything we've been through? I stepped aside, letting her into the foyer, but not inviting her further. After everything you've done, Amanda, I don't see another option. She opened her mouth to retort, but stopped herself, her expression shifting into something more calculated. We can fix this, she said, her voice softening. We don't have to throw everything away. You still here? Incredulous. You think there's something left to fix? After you lied to me, cheated on me, and planned to take me for everything I have? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize. But instead, she lashed out. This is your fault, Eric, she snapped. You've been so distant, so cold. I was lonely. What did you expect me to do? I laughed bitterly. Don't try to rewrite history, Amanda. I've been there every step of the way, trying to hold this marriage together while you were out playing house with Sean. Her face flushed, and she turned on her heel, storming out without another word. A week later, the fallout spread beyond our home. I received a call from an unexpected source, Cassandra, Sean's wife. I thought you should know, she began, her voice tight with controlled anger, that I've filed for divorce. Good for you, I said, unsure where she was going with this. Sean doesn't know yet, she continued. But when he finds out, I'm going to make sure he understands exactly why. I could hear the fire in her voice, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of solidarity with this woman I'd never met. Do you need anything from me? I asked. No, she said, her tone softening slightly. But thank you. And good luck, Eric. Amanda's next move was as predictable as it was infuriating. She started spinning a narrative, telling anyone who would listen that I had driven her to the affair. According to her, I'd neglected her emotionally, leaving her no choice but to seek comfort elsewhere. The first time I heard this, I was at work and Lily brought it to my attention. She's talking to people in your network, Lily said, her brow furrowed in concern. I heard it through a client. She's saying you're a workaholic, that you ignored her needs. I clenched my jaw, my anger simmering just below the surface. "Let her talk," I said. "She doesn't have a shred of proof to back it up." Even so, I knew I couldn't let her lies go unchecked. With David's help, I prepared a detailed rebuttal, outlining the reality of our marriage with a clarity Amanda couldn't dispute. I wasn't just fighting for my assets, I was fighting for my reputation. The real blow came when Amanda took her smear campaign a step further. One morning, I woke to find several emails in my inbox, all with the same subject line. "Have you seen this?" The links led to a series of anonymous posts on social media, accusing me of financial misconduct and unethical practices within my firm. The allegations were baseless, of course, but the timing was no coincidence. I immediately called Lila. "It's her," I said, my voice tight with anger. "She's trying to sabotage my business." "Leave it to me," Lila replied. Within days, Lila traced the post back to Amanda's email account. Armed with this evidence, David filed a motion to expose her tactics in court. When the truth came out, Amanda's remaining credibility crumbled. The judge took one look at the evidence, her affair, her attempts to manipulate the narrative, and her blatant smear campaign, and ruled decisively in my favor. By the end of the proceedings, Amanda walked away with little more than her personal belongings and a fraction of the assets she'd been angling for. Sean, too, found himself cornered, his reputation in ruins as Cassandra's divorce case gained traction. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. Amanda had played her hand, and she'd lost. She could try to rewrite the story all she wanted, but the truth was out there now, and there was no undoing it. The day the divorce was finalized, I sat alone in my living room, the decree resting on the coffee table in front of me. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and forces you to confront what you've lost and what you've gained. For 25 years, Amanda and I had built a life together, one that had now unraveled completely. But as I sat there, the weight of those years felt lighter than it had in months. David had done exactly what he'd promised. With the evidence we'd presented, the judge awarded me the house, the majority of our shared assets, and full control of my business. Amanda walked away with a meager settlement that wouldn't last her long, given her penchant for luxury. The finality of it all felt surreal. For the first time in weeks, there were no games left to play, no battles left to fight. A few days later, Amanda showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing on the porch, looking far less polished than usual. Her makeup was minimal, her clothes simple, and for a moment, she almost looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Eric," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "What do you want, Amanda?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the floor. I wanted to talk. Can I come in?" I considered her for a long moment before stepping aside. She walked into the living room, her gaze sweeping over the familiar space with a mixture of longing and regret. "You've kept it nice," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "It's my home," I replied simply. Amanda sank into the couch, wringing her hands in her lap. "I know I've made mistakes," she began, her voice trembling. "Big ones. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I miss you, Eric. I miss us." I felt a flicker of anger rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. "You miss the life you destroyed," I said, my tone cold but measured. "Not us. That's been gone for a long time." She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with tears. "We could try again," she said desperately. "We could start over. I've changed." "I know," I said firmly, cutting her off. "You didn't just hurt me, Amanda. You betrayed me, lied to me, and tried to take everything I worked for. There's no going back from that." Her tears spilled over, but I didn't move to comfort her. "I loved you," I continued, my voice steady. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away for someone who didn't even respect you. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." She stood abruptly, her face twisting with a mix of sorrow and anger. "You're a cold man, Eric," she spat. "I hope you enjoy being alone." "I will," I said, holding her gaze. "Because for the first time in a long time, I'm free." Amanda stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I watched her go without a shred of regret. The news about Sean came a few weeks later. Cassandra had followed through with her divorce, and it didn't take long for Sean's indiscretions to catch up to him. Rumors of his affairs spread through his company like wildfire, and HR couldn't ignore the mounting complaints. He was let go quietly, the company citing conduct unbecoming of a senior employee. But the fallout wasn't quiet for long. Cassandra's divorce filings included damning details that made their way into the local grapevine, and Sean's reputation was left in tatters. Life after the divorce was quieter than I expected. The house, once filled with the hum of shared routines, felt almost too large for just one person. But I didn't mind the solitude. I threw myself into my work, expanding the firm and taking on projects I'd once been too cautious to pursue. Lily became a steady presence in my professional life, her sharp mind and infectious energy a welcome distraction from the emotional aftermath. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, I found myself inviting her out for a drink. Just as friends, I clarified as we sat at the bar, nursing our cocktails. "Of course," she said, smiling slyly. "For now." We talked about everything and nothing: work, travel, the absurdity of our industry. It was easy, unforced, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to enjoy the moment without overthinking what it meant. Bye-bye.